Welcome to Brilliant Minds Unlocked.
Hello.
Today we are talking about tailoring, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about terror. We are doing a deep dive into the legend of the Peaky Blinders.
An absolute legend.
You know the image, right? Everyone does. The gravelly, slow-motion walk, those perfect three-piece suits, and of course, the cool, calculating menace of Cillian Murphy's Thomas Shelby. For so many people, he is the ultimate outlaw icon. He's been, elevated from the grimy back streets of Birmingham to the absolute height of television mythology.
And it is a magnificent, stunning piece of fiction, a stunning cathedral of fiction. But what we're doing today is, I think, taking that popular legend and asking a really fundamental question.
Which is?
What was the original kernel of dirt and, frankly, desperation that this whole shining myth grew out of?
Right.
The real Peaky Blinders story is far less about tailored overcoats and political maneuvering, and much, much more about a brutal symptom of a society that was in a really violent transition.
Exactly. We are ripping back the curtain. Our mission, for you listening, is to extract the painful truth behind what we're calling the ghost in the legend.
I like that.
These were desperate youths in post-Victorian Birmingham. And to understand them, we have to start not with the character, but with the crucible.
Yes, we have to go back to the environment that forged these gangs. We have to go to Birmingham, circa 1890.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's set the scene. And you have to forget the soft focus and the beautifully lit smoke of the television show. We're in late 19th century Birmingham.
The workshop of the world.
The workshop of the world. What did living there actually feel like?
It was an industrial inferno. I mean, it was not a gentle place to exist. The air was perpetually choked, and not just dirty. It was thick with poisonous soot from thousands of roaring foundries and mills.
And the canals.
The canals, which were the arteries of the city, ran thick with chemical waste. The sheer noise alone, the constant hammering of metal on metal, it would have been overwhelming.
And this industrial behemoth, it was a magnet, wasn't it? It just pulled people in.
A huge magnet.
Yeah.
It attracted this tidal wave of people. The rural poor, people displaced from the countryside, and huge waves of Irish immigrants who were all looking for some kind of work.
And they found work, sure, but they also found squalor on a scale that's hard to comprehend.
Total squalor. They were crammed into these infamous back-to-back houses.
Which had no real sanitation, right?
No proper sanitation, no running water. Often you'd have entire families, multiple generations, housed in a single room. Areas like Small Heath and Cheapside became infamous for it.
And there was an area known locally as Bombay.
Yes, Bombay, a nickname that just says everything you need to know about how overcrowded and dangerously dense those slums were.
So desperation wasn't just common, it was like the primary currency of daily life. When children are growing up with virtually no expectation of sanitation or education or any kind of economic mobility, where does all that energy go?
It congeals. It has to find an outlet, and that outlet was organized. Territorial violence. Out of this cauldron of deprivation, youth gangs emerged, and they were fierce.
And the Peaky Blinders weren't the only ones initially.
Oh, not at all. They weren't the only show in town. You had groups like the Sloggers, the Garrisons, and the very specifically named Cheapside Sloggers.
These were local tribes then, fighting over every street corner, every meager illicit economy they could find.
That's it, exactly.
Which brings us to the biggest cinematic hook, the detail everyone knows, or thinks they know.
The razor blade.
The razor blade stitched into the peak of the cap, ready to, blind an opponent. It's a terrifying, visceral, and let's be honest, a brilliantly marketable concept.
It certainly is, and this raises the really important question. Did the razor cap actually exist?
Well, what's fascinating here is that when you actually look at the contemporary police reports, the court records from the 1890s when the real gang was at its peak, that specific weapon is just absent.
It's not there.
And there's a major complication for the myth, which is that disposable safety razors, the kind you could actually sew into a cap, they didn't become widely available and cheap until years after the original Peaky Blinders had already faded away.
We have to completely debunk that myth. The reality of their fighting style was much more varied and, frankly, much more visceral.
So what were the real weapons of choice?
For these youths, who the press often derogatorily called street Arabs, the weapons were simple, heavy, and whatever was at hand. Massive leather belts with huge metal buckles.
A weapon in itself?
A terrible weapon.
Yeah.
Metal-tipped boots, rocks, knives. If a razor was used, it was for slashing. not for this bizarre surgical blinding maneuver the cap implies.
So if the razor myth is fiction, where does the name Peaky Blinders actually come from? The reality is that what, sartorial, not surgical?
Correct. The name is literally a description of their fashion. Peaky just referred to the peaked cap they wore. It was a common, cheap piece of working-class headwear at the time.
Okay, so that's the peaky part.
But the blinder part is what they were proud of.
And what did blinder mean in 1890s Birmingham slang?
It was slang for someone who was sharp-dressed, strikingly put together, a dandy. It's sort of like saying someone looks brilliant or smart today.
So their whole ambition was right there in the name.
Exactly. They were simply the well-dressed youths in peaked caps.
The genius of the myth, then, is that public fear, which was stoked by all this sensationalist Victorian journalism, it took that name and transformed a simple cap peak into a weapon of blinding terror.
It's an incredible example of how legend and fear can combine.
I think that's one of the most compelling pieces of this whole puzzle. The name was a statement of style and defiance. Okay, so let's turn to the structure of the real gang. Forget the monolithic Shelby family corporation.
Right, Shelby Company Limited. No, the real Peaky Blinders were a loose confederation, more like a tribal network of several hundred young men, mostly in their late teens and early 20s.
And they lacked that centralized hierarchical control that we see in the show.
Completely. And crucially, the leadership was entirely different.
And no Thomas Shelby.
The man who police records point to as the most notorious leaguer was a man named Thomas Gilbert, who sometimes went by Kevin Mooney.
Tell us what kind of man he was, because he is such a crucial contrast to Tommy Shelby.
Thomas Gilbert was, to put it simply, a brute. The police records describe him as violent and dangerous. His power came from sheer physical dominance, not strategic genius, not financial acumen.
He led through terror and intimidation.
Just being the hardest man in the hardest part of the city, not the smartest.
So what was the extent of their empire? I mean, we know it wasn't arms trafficking. What did their day-to-day street-level thuggery actually look like?
It was absolute local governance by fear. Their bedrock was the protection racket. They would intimidate local publicans, small shopkeepers, street vendors.
Demanding weekly payments.
Yes, and if you failed to pay the Peaky Blinders, your stock would be ruined, and you, or worse, your family would be assaulted. This created these localized pockets of extreme fear across the neighborhoods they controlled.
They were also notorious for something called mug hunting, right? Targeting anyone who looked like they had money.
Absolutely. They would often target wealthier patrons leaving race meetings, knowing they'd be carrying winnings. It was opportunistic robbery, pickpocketing.
And they controlled the illicit economies?
The local ones, yes. Primarily gambling pitches and illegal bookmaking. And their brawling was ferocious, often fatal. Their focus was solely on maintaining physical dominance over a few city blocks.
This sounds unremittingly grim, and yet we keep coming back to the style, the dandies of the ditch using clothing as a statement. How was their fashion functional for crime?
Every single item served a purpose beyond vanity. We've talked about the peaked caps, pulled low to obscure the eyes and identity, but consider the bell-bottom trousers.
Not just a trend.
Not at all. They were practical for concealing weapons like clubs or metal rods, and they were ideal for riding bicycles.
No expensive motor cars, just bicycles.
Bicycles were their main mode of transport. It allowed them to mobilize rapidly around the sprawling slums.
And the accessories.
They accessorized with silk scarves, which were often stolen, and that provided a flash of finery and color against all the crime. And the boots. Heavy, leather, always polished.
And most importantly,
tipped with metal. Specifically used for kicking a downed or vulnerable opponent.
So their glamour was less about bespoke tailoring and more a defiant, practical uniform of menace.
Yes. There's a newspaper description from 1899 that just nails this. It describes a captured member wearing a peaked cap, a black bell-bottom suit, and an oversized scarf. It was tribal.
It was their way of saying, we may live in the filth, but we choose our own identity, and you should fear it.
Perfectly put.
Now we get to part 4, the Great Schism. Stephen Knight took that kernel of truth and, as you said, built a narrative cathedral. We have to dissect the crucial differences.
And the timeline is the most significant one. It's the absolute foundation of the divergence.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The historical Peaky Blinders peaked in the 1890s. They had largely faded by the time the First World War broke out. They were a Victorian, maybe Edwardian phenomenon.
And yet, the entire emotional weight of the television series begins in 1919. Thomas Shelby and his brothers are traumatized veterans of the Great War, suffering from shell shock.
Which places the fictional gang a full generation after the originals had already been supplanted.
So the fictional Shelbys are spiritual inheritors.
They're spiritual successors, not historical ones.
And then there's the scale and sophistication. The real Peaky Blinders were a local territorial headache for the Birmingham police force, a group of thugs controlling the gambling on a few streets.
A serious problem, but a local one.
The fictional gang, on the other hand, is an international criminal syndicate, a global threat to the British establishment, dealing in arms, corporate espionage, navigating the highest political circles with Winston Churchill.
The divergence is, it's absolute. And the leaders embody this difference perfectly.
Thomas Gilbert versus Thomas Shelby.
Thomas Gilbert was a brute who led by physical dominance, terror, and the threat of a metal-tipped boot. Thomas Shelby is the polymath criminal mastermind. He's a tactician, a philosopher king who uses psychological warfare and accounting to control his empire.
The real gang leaders were the hardest men.
And the fictional leader is the smartest man. It's a complete inversion.
And finally, that contrast. The glamour versus the grime. The series is dark, it's moody, it's beautifully choreographed.
It is.
But the reality, as we firmly established, was one of unremitting filth. Streets layered in industrial refuse, horse manure, human refuse.
The real Peaky Blinders glamour was just a crude, desperate attempt to rise above that misery. It wasn't a curated cinematic aesthetic.
It was survival fashion.
Survival fashion bought with stolen money and designed to communicate only two things: defiance and danger.
So if they weren't outsmarted by some charismatic rival gangster, an Alfie Solomons type figure, how did the real Peaky Blinders actually fade away?
Their decline wasn't some epic, dramatic finale. It was more of an evolutionary process. By the early 1910s, they were simply supplanted by a new, more ruthless generation of criminals.
And their territories and power were absorbed by a gang led by a man named Billy Kimber.
The very same.
Billy Kimber is a real historical figure, and he appears as the season 1 antagonist, but in reality his gang, the Birmingham Boys, came after the Peaky Blinders and effectively ended their reign.
That's right. Kimber's group represented a key evolutionary shift in English organized crime. They moved away from localized street brawling and toward a more businesslike, nationally organized form of criminality.
So Kimber was different.
Kimber controlled racecourse protection rackets across the entire country. He operated almost like an early corporate CEO of crime. The Peaky Blinders were tribal. Kimber was organized.
So the name, that powerful, terrifying name, Peaky Blinders, it didn't vanish entirely.
Not at all. It lingered in local folklore, in pub stories, and in sensationalist newspaper reports for decades. It became this whispered legend passed down through generations.
The very tales that Stephen Knight's father heard.
The very same ones. And those tales form the foundation for the show. And that's really the true legacy we are left with.
The two legends.
Yes. The historical Peaky Blinders were a tragic footnote, a symptom of crushing industrial pressure. They were violent, short-lived, and uneducated. They were just trying to claw their way out of a slum.
While the fictional Peaky Blinders are a magnificent myth, an archetype used to explore trauma and ambition and the fluidity of class in Britain.
I think the show's genius lies not in its historical accuracy, but in its profound emotional truth.
How so?
It takes that raw, defiant, desperate energy of the 1890s street gang, and it projects it onto this operatic stage where they finally achieve the power and respect they craved in real life but never could.
So when you next see that cinematic image of Thomas Shelby, the man who can call presidents and control parliaments, what should you remember?
Remember the ghosts in the flat cap. Remember the desperate youths in their rough donkey jackets fighting over a few feet of filthy street in a city that truly didn't care if they lived or died. The real Peaky Blinders were not kings. They were prisoners, and their kingdom was a slum.